We're bickering about GDP or growth numbers, which are now shrouded in controversy after the government revised the data that ends up making the UPA look not so good in its handling of the economy and makes the Modi government look better. On the show tonight, we're looking closely at both these issues. The latest GDP figures came out today showing that growth has actually declined from the last quarter. Well, thousands of farmers, more than 35,000 of them from all over India, gathered at Jantar Mantar in the national capital today to demand loan waivers and better prices for their produce. The two-day protest has highlighted the serious concerns about rural distress. Many farmers marching barefoot, many widows of those who had committed suicide were also there. The protest also brought opposition parties together, including Rahul Gandhi and Arvind Kejriwal for the very first time on the same stage. As that story was unfolding, the latest GDP numbers were released this evening and they show that growth has slowed down from the last quarter. It's at 7.1% as compared to 8.2% in the previous quarter, and one of the sectors that is down this time is agriculture. And joining us on Left, Right and Centre first tonight is the Vice Chairman of the Niti Aayog, Mr. Rajiv Kumar. Mr. Kumar, thank you for being with us. Could I get your first thoughts on today's GDP numbers? Are you a bit disappointed that it's not as good as last time?
No, of course, one is disappointed that the growth momentum has not sustained and therefore there is a dip. But this is when you look at quarter on quarter, as we say. But if you look at the year ago and if you look at the Q2, the second quarter of previous year, 2017-18, you will see that it was at 6.3 then, it's 7.1 now. So in that respect, this is partly seasonal. This is the time when agriculture output, which was 5.3 last year, is now 3.8. So and the very good silver lining is that the investment growth, which is contained in the numbers of gross fixed capital formation, has shown a real sharp increase, and so it shows that the investment cycle is beginning to perk up. So Nidhi, of course, I would have been much happier if the growth was 8.3%, but we have to take what it is. But I must confess that this perhaps further burnishes the technical credentials of the CSO, which has been at the end of some very undeserving comments.
I'm going to talk about that with you in just a moment, but I did want to get a comment from you on, the massive farmers' protest as well that we were seeing converging in the national capital today while these GDP numbers were being released. As you said, agriculture is one of the sectors where we've actually seen a decline since, last year when we look at the year-on-year numbers. How is this issue of rural distress, you think, being handled at the moment? I mean, what is the fact that so many thousands of farmers coming to the national capital tell you?
Nidhi, I am very empathetic with the farmers' demands, and one should, one should look at them very seriously. I'm not so sure that thousands of farmers represent a very large segment of the actual farming community, because they are of course in crores, if you like, and the government has promised the minimum support price, which is 50% higher than the cost of production. There might well be, and this is something that we need to look at, some delays or some bottlenecks in the procurement by the state governments, because as you realize, this is a state subject, and this is rather unfortunate in some sense that the state capitals don't face these sorts of protests, and they all come to Delhi, which is, agriculture is not a central subject, and the center has the responsibility of fixing the prices, the minimum support prices, but then the entire responsibility lies at the door of the respective all the states, and so I would wish that this question is posed more to the respective state governments, rather than be laid at the door of the central government at this point.
If I may, is that a rather cold way of looking at a very serious protest? I mean, you look at the pictures of these farmers today on barefoot, their widows carrying the pictures of their husbands around their neck. I mean, at the end of the day, the central government is as much their government, it's everyone's government and their government. So is it fair to just put the onus on states?
Nidhi, no, No. So you please recall that I started by saying that I want to look at the farmers' distress. I've been trying to work at this in Niti Aayog, in trying to have new programs to reduce the farmers' costs, to reduce the debt burden, to get the to get the farm sector modernized, as it were. I am fully aware, cognizant, sympathetic, and not at all either cynical or cold towards their actual distress. I am merely saying that there is a division of work, there is a division of role. Now, you see, I ask you that what can the central government do in procuring these, lentils and the tilhans and the dalhans, which are grown in the Kharif season, which are meant to be procured by the state
centre also makes promises.
That's what I'm asking you.
Well, political parties who are at the centre, including the BJP, have made promises to farmers in their manifestos, which they haven't necessarily kept. But can I move to the GDP numbers for a moment?
Look, hang on. Yeah. Nidhi, just 1 second. Nidhi, 1 second. The promise made was to declare a minimum support price, which was 50% higher than the total cost of production, without including land, and that promise has been kept.
Well, there is a technical difference, because it's a different subcategory in which that has happened, and I'll let the economists argue that out. That's why farmers are not happy. That's why they're out on the streets. But just coming to these GDP numbers, Mr. Kumar. Now, since yesterday, many economists have pointed out that when you look at this revised GDP data, it just doesn't make sense when you look at the economic indicators on the ground. For instance, during the UPA years, the gross investment to GDP ratio had peaked at 38%. In the NDA government's 4 years, it has been at its lowest at 30.3%. So, how does this make sense when you look at this data? It's not matching with the data on the ground.
Yeah. Yesterday, Professor T.C. Anand, who was the former secretary for the Ministry of Statistics, and who also vetted this data, because in the two roundtables that Niti Aayog had arranged, had given one explanation, which was to say that in these long-term trend averages, it is very difficult to correlate one ratio to the other, because there are lots of lead and lags in economic phenomena, which I think everybody would agree. That's the first part. The second part, which I will add to this, Nidhi, and I hope you will listen to it carefully, which is that when that investment was peaking at 38%, it was perhaps going in projects which weren't completed, or which were stranded, or which did not add to the economic activity or to the economic output. And this, we the economists talk in terms of raising the capital output ratio, because you have capital which is misused or unused or inefficiently used. So therefore, what you do, for example, if you look at let's say the US figures, the investment rates are much lower. They're probably but they get a growth rate of 3.5%. But you see, and the Chinese investment rates have been 50%. Doesn't mean that they would get a growth rate of 12%. So there is this ratio called the capital output ratio, which itself works with lags. And all those people who are making this contemporaneous comparisons of saying that 28% here and 7% there and 38% there and 8% there, forget that there is something known as
when you talk about this capital output ratio, again, economists have pointed out that doesn't factor in the shock of demonetization. It doesn't factor in the way GST was implemented. And let me ask you about another smell test. Now, in the UPA era, exports were at about 20% plus. Bank credit to industry was growing at over 15%. The corporate earnings of the top 1,100 companies was growing at over 20%. If you look at the last 4 years under the NDA government, export growth has been zero. Bank credit to industry has been growing in the low single digits. Private investment growth is next to nothing. The corporate earnings of the top 1,100 companies has been growing at about 2% a year. Again, there is a mismatch. There was also a report submitted in July this year by a subcommittee of the Statistics Commission, which said the complete opposite of what this revised data said yesterday. That actually said that the growth under the UPA era was higher, and it was in double digits in 2 consecutive years. So which data are we supposed to believe, Mr. Kumar?
Nidhi, I leave it to you to believe whichever you want to believe, and I see clearly that you made up your mind So it's quite pointless for me to take this discussion.
I'm only giving you statistics, sir. These are all facts.
No, because you see these are not facts. Let me tell you, these are not facts. And for example, the last one that you quoted about the subcommittee of the National Statistics Commission, do you realize that what they did, their methodology, they found a GDP gap in the GDP levels of 3 lakh crore in 2011-12 compared to the two series, and distributed that equally across all the previous years to come up with a new growth rate? They didn't estimate the level of economic activity, but you made up your mind, you call it a fact. So what am I supposed to do?
No, Mr. Kumar, the fact is another report was submitted.
Now,
one second. The fact here is that another report was submitted. That another report was submitted. People are trying to understand why did one report say growth was higher 6 months ago?
Which report?
The subcommittee's
Which report?
The
subcommittee was not even expected, or this subcommittee was not expected or mandated to estimate the batch series. It's not a job that you do in 2 weeks.
And may I ask why the Niti Aayog held this press conference at all, Mr. Kumar? Why the Niti Aayog held this press conference at all? Because this is actually not your domain. Again, another criticism from people like Pranab Sen have said that this has actually politicized the entire exercise. This is the CSO's domain and not the Niti Aayog's.
Nidhi, first I must lodge my protest that you sent me the message to say that you will talk about the GDP series numbers that have come out today, and which is why I agreed. But let me tell you
Mr.
why
Kumar, I have the messages here to talk about the revised GDP data. We sent you the request yesterday before today's GDP numbers came. Happy to show them to you.
Which I had politely refused.
Because you were busy yesterday.
You sent me this message this
Your
morning.
message says you were busy yesterday.
No, but you sent me this message. You said, could we please do the interview after the new GDP data comes today?
Yeah, that is this morning. That is this morning.
Does that mean?
Why, would you like to go back and see yesterday's message?
Therefore, do not. Sorry.
Please.
Yesterday's, I did not agree to
Here is the SMS, sir. Can we please do an interview? This is yesterday's SMS. Can we please do an interview with you today on the new GDP data? We can do it whenever convenient for you. This is yesterday morning on the revised data.
I said sorry.
Yeah, because you said you're busy. Let's do it tomorrow.
Sorry.
So, I mean, I don't know why we're having this back and forth. Why don't you answer the question, sir? Why did the Niti Aayog have this press conference?
Yes. Look. Try and be a little more bannerly. But the fact is, the Niti Aayog held 2 round tables to vet and examine and get this data checked by 10 top statisticians of the country, and all of which names you can check, including the former Secretary of Statistics, the chairman of the
Niti Aayog has not held a press conference on GDP numbers on this
just listen.
Before.
Now, will you listen to me now, for God's sakes?
But why
will you listen to me?
Mr. Kumar, don't get unhappy, sir. We're just doing our jobs. We're asking a question.
Let me answer the question that you asked.
Why did the Niti Aayog do the press conference?
Let me answer the question that you asked. Because we were the platform which had done this checking and this vetting, and because release of batch series is not a technistic exercise. It's an exercise which requires the whole economy and has macroeconomic impact. And Niti Aayog, and as Pranab Sen would know, that the Department of Statistics used to be a department of the Ministry of Planning. And Niti Aayog and CSO work very closely together, because Niti Aayog is in the business of making policy which is evidence-based, which is data-based, and which is data analyzed. It is completely spurious to say that Niti Aayog does not have a mandate to talk about the data and the release of such data, which is important. And Niti Aayog and the Ministry of Statistics and Planning are a part of the same government, and they requested us to do so. Why is this a big issue?
Please do ask Mr. Pranab Sen and other economists who raised it.
Completely incomprehensible.
Well, thank you, Mr. Kumar, for giving us your perspective on this controversy that's erupted since yesterday, as well as today's GDP data and the farmer protest.